Okay, so look, in this discussion post, we really just are asking about, about looking at the data set and really just looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the data set. And in fact, what we can do is actually just look at the post itself. Okay, so it says, so actually, I actually ask you to do um, sort of like a daydreaming exercise, if you will. And it might seem kind of crazy, but the thing is if you don't really have a clear concept of what an ideal data set and an ideal setup would really look like, then it's really hard to think about how your setup deviates from that ideal and the consequences that you might actually have because of that deviation. So always start with just an idealized, this, if I could do anything, this is what I would have. Okay, always do that when you start off a project. And I'm introducing you as a data scientist to this concept. Okay, I specifically quoting this section in your book, this 4.1 page. I'm saying page 67, and you really should read page 67, and it kind of comes off into gives you an introduction to the rest of the text, which if you read, you can get a sense as to what we're talking about here. We're talking about this is really experimental design. So these are cause and effects. Okay, so cause and effect. We need to make causal statements if we really want to get an idea about this. Okay, so why? Because we're talking about what's the effect on quantity when we change price. That's a cause and effect question. Okay, so we can't just look, we can look at correlations and kind of get there a little bit. It's just that causal experimental type of design ways are going to be the most robust way to look at causal statements. Okay, that's what you need to know. So they talk about classical experiments. You got a classical experiment, treatment control group. Remember, treatment group gets the treatment, control group doesn't. You might see this in like A/B testing. Those are kind of similar. All of these have that kind of experimental design. And the thing is what's the control group? The control group doesn't get the treatment. Why do they have that? What's the point? Well, clearly the control group is sort of to stand in, or it's basically to stand in for what we think that would happen to the treatment group if they never got treated, right? That's the thing that you can never actually observe, because once you give someone that pill, that treatment pill, they're treated. From that point forward, they've been treated. You can't untreat them, right? And see what they would have done. So the trick then is that we never get to see what happens in that, what they call, it's an alternative. It's a counterfactual outcome. It's counterfactual because it never happens. We never get to see it. So we have this control group that we're going to say, okay, this control group is going to be what the treatment group looked like if they never got treated. That's why we have a control group. You can also think to yourself, why not just look at the control group? So you can also look at the treatment group and give them and say, okay, we're going to measure we're going to measure some type of outcome. In this case, it would be quantity, like how much the person demands. We can measure it, before the price change, and then make a price change, and then measure their quantity demanded afterwards, and just look at the difference. Why can't you do that? Think about this. Why can't you do that? Why can't you just look at the treatment group and go, okay, here's a before, we treated them, and then here's an after. Obviously, the difference must be the treatment effect, right? But you can't do that. Why? Think about it. Well, there could be a lot of other confounding factors that cause demand to vary over time. For instance, COVID, okay? You got a big shock like COVID smacks down, or a big gigantic monetary stimulus. There's a million different macroeconomic events that are happening all the time that are causing demand to fluctuate over time. You can't just do this, okay? Because, hey, it changes based upon a lot of other unknown, they call them latent factors or unseen factors driving outcomes to change over time. Okay, so you can't just do before and after. So think about this: the control group and the treatment group, two groups, and they're moving over time. and we're thinking that that they should be both impacted similarly by these unobserved factors like COVID, or like these other types of things that might cause these outcomes or quantity demands to become to change over time. We're going to sort of think to ourselves that the treatment group and the control group are going to be moving together over time, like fish swimming in an ocean, up and down over time. That's the assumption that we're really going to need to sort of lean on. And so all the different methods have different strategies to try to create these type of groups, and all strategies also fall somewhat victim to the fact that we don't actually have the same exact people over time. And so there could be some differences actually that cause the groups themselves to take a different evolutionary dynamic over time, because the groups are different possibly. And all methods will have that and all share that same weakness. It's going to be expressed a little differently. That's a big picture here. Okay. So that's what we're doing. We're looking at causal situations. That's the big like overview of where this chapter sits. And then with that, I'm saying let's look at this data and see what are the limitations. Okay. What kind of uses? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and do this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take in datasets, Tableau. Oops, I'm in the wrong class. Let me go to statistics. No, I'm in the wrong class. I'm sorry. I'm in the total wrong class. So bear with me one second while I navigate. You get to see my file navigation is extensive here. And here we go. Courses, new development. This is a new course, and we're going to go into Tableau Data Science. And let's go ahead and look up the SOTA demand. And let's go ahead and look up all files. And in fact, that is there. So let's go ahead and do this. Okay, well, I tried to do it. So yeah, I need to import this as a text file because it's a CSV. Okay, great. Now I got SOTA demand. So first, we see that this is, this is a data set of different monthly level store data for various types of brands and container sizes and types. Okay, so that's what we have here. And the very first thing that we need to look at is there variation in price? Okay, that's what we got out of the first thing. Because remember, no variation, hey, we're stuck in the mud. So you should always, click on your data interpreter and let it do its thing. But the very first thing you need to do is to think about, is there variation here? So let's go to a sheet and explore variation. And let's go ahead and look at prices and quantities, okay? Because we can look at, is there variation in both by just plotting them against each other? So let's do a price response function. And remember, we want quantity to be the dependent variable on the y-axis and prices to be in the column. And then we're going to change, because we're not going to just want to add up the price. That doesn't make any sense. Remember, we talked about that in a previous video, where we want the measure to be that average price. Okay. So, and this is a singular dot because I've got the average and the sum over the entire data set. So now we need to look at adding some variability into here. So let's go ahead and let's pick a particular brand. Let's go ahead and filter. Let's just go ahead and look at a specific brand and a specific container. We can actually do this a couple different ways. Okay. In fact, what I could do if I want to look at all variation is let's go ahead and scatter these out by date. And let's go ahead and scatter them by date. And I don't want just year. Let's go ahead and scatter it by year and month. Remember, not just month, because that's going to aggregate over all years. Let's go scatter it out by year and month. Okay, there's a nice scatter chart now. Okay, looks like I've got all kinds of variation. I don't see any kind of clear linear trends here. We got to dive in a little deeper. So let's go ahead and look at, let's go ahead and filter for a particular container, or else we'll just end up with too many dimensions. Let's look at cans, okay, just for a heck of it. And now let's look at brands, and I'll just pull it up here. Okay, there's brands. Okay, so actually I'm seeing that there is quite a good amount of variation in both prices and quantities. Okay, That's all right. And then, what you guys will end up doing is, going to, this will be your next assignment, but just taking and doing a trend line on these to get your regression line. And we see that we have sort of this downward sloping linear relationship that's starting to look like a price response function. Okay, great. So, but we do have variation. We see that there is quite a good amount of variation. I can also look more detailed if I want, and just sort of explore variation a little bit more. But it looks like we've got good variation. I mean, I could filter and say, let's go ahead and just look at 1 year. Um, let's go ahead and just say pick 2014, a single year. A single year, yeah, we have price. And okay, now what about, I also have location. So we want to make sure that we look down at the most detailed level. And I haven't quite gotten location in here. So let's get location. Where is this? City. City is going to do it for me. So if I take city, I'll drop it in the rows. There we go. Now I've got all Athens, all these different cities, and here's the different brands. So for a given lemon boost, I can see that there is in fact variation. Okay, there is variation in this data set with both price and quantities. I can clearly see that. Another way to do it is to plot it as a time series. So I could do that. Let's go ahead and let's take price and quantity in the column, and let's put the date on the bottom. How's that? The date with month and year. Oops, I plotted them in the wrong way. Let's pull it like this. Let's go crazy for a minute, but let's go like that. There we go. Now I've got the time series actually for a given year, and you can see that over a given year, quantities are varying, and also prices are varying across the year. So I can plot this as a time series here, and the key the thing that I wanted to really just convince myself of first off is that I have variation in both price and quantities, and I have to have that in order to study it. I feel like I've proven that to myself. I feel confident now that I do have variation in both price and quantity, so that's a big check there. Now, the second thing is, how many observations do we have? So, how are we going to figure out how many observations we have for each of these? In fact, you know what? Let's just go ahead and duplicate this sheet. So one thing I can do, so I don't want to have to go through the filters and create all the same stuff that I did before. So let's just go ahead and duplicate the sheet. I got sheet 2 down here, and we're just going to remove. Let's see, remove these. I want to actually see what the count is. What's the count? So let's go ahead and make a cross tab, and we're going to take out month, day. Right there, cross tab. So now I've got brands and city, okay, and for cans, and let's do it for brand and city, okay, can, and let's look at the count of container. So what I can do is take price. I could actually take price here and drag it in, and then we don't want the sum of price. Let's go down to measurement, and let's look at the count. That's for a given year. Okay. It looks like actually some of these actually, we found an interesting thing. There's some of these have 12, some have 24. That's interesting. I'm not sure why that's the case. These are things to explore. We see for a given year, we have that much. Let's look at the whole set. So let's go ahead and remove the year filter. Which 12, that's because we have 12 months in a year. So we had it like that. We can see that we have about 84 observations per area. So for every city, brand, and container type, that's the most microeconomic unit that we're going to want to look at. We have about 84 observations. We have 167 in Athens. Okay, that's now if we take out the city, so this is the thing we're going to be kind of looking at is the size of this data set. Now, That's a little on the small side, right? A little bit. It's marginal. 84 observations, but I'd say, we have variation in both price and quantity. We have 84 observations for the smallest unit of measurement here. The smallest one, again, is we're looking at within a city, within a brand, for a specific container. That's the smallest, unit of sort of market. That's the actual market we're looking at. Now, I could remove city from, yeah, I could remove city, and now we have 500 observations, but those are across cities. And so one thing is that, yeah, you can potentially aggregate up to get higher numbers here, 501. And basically aggregate up, what I mean is I'm looking at the number of, so for a given brand, container, type, right? This is for Kinder Cola cans. I have 503 observations, but these are across multiple cities. That's a little less than ideal because we know that demand and preferences are probably going to change depending on your geography. Okay. Then not the most ideal. So I would say actually we do, whenever we get a chance, we do actually really want to look locally, and local matters. So let's keep it that way. I'd say that's preferable to aggregating up. And but still, 84 observations were marginal. Okay, so it's not a strength. It's kind of weak, but not terribly weak. Typically, as a rule of thumb, try to shoot for 100 if you can. Okay, that's that. And there's no hard cutoffs. Okay, we're not gonna have hard cutoffs on what's too small, too big, but more is definitely better. And 100 observations is like, so how could you get past this? You could try to increase the frequency at which you observe the data. Maybe you could observe it weekly. Do we have weekly, by the way? Let's see. Do we have? No, we don't have weekly, do we? Because I did not. Nope. We have monthly. Okay, but we could think about weekly. That might be the solution, or just looking at more stores. Look, certain. So we had two shops that we were typically surveying. Look at more shops. And in fact, that might be why Athens has more count. Probably, I'm going to guess that they have more shops. That's what I'm going to guess. Um, let's do shop. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and instead of this, let's explore this idea. Actually, I'm going to remove shop. No, I did not want to do it like that. Remove shop. It won't let me do this, right? 1 and 3, 2, 5, 6. Yeah, so you see Athens has two shops in here. That's why actually it has more numbers. So you can get more numbers by getting more shops. Just prove that too. Those are ways that you can address those issues, okay, for the size. Now, second question, do we have an experimental setup? Well, actually, the clear answer there is no, we don't. So when I look at these shops, you see the price changes, right? But do you see a treatment group or a control group? So no, we don't. We don't see a treatment group or control group at all. We do see actually that there's two shops in Athens, shop 1 and 3. So we do have potential. We have like two shops, 1 and 3. We'd have to look at how they're changing their prices though, and so in order to really make it effective, one would have to keep their prices the same. The other would have to change their prices. Okay, in order to make us to like come up and cook up kind of an experimental setting. Does that happen? Ooh, I'm gonna guess not, but we could look at it. Okay, how are we gonna look at it? Well, let's go back and look at the time series of things. So how do we get time series again? Let's look at prices. Let's look at prices over time. So let's throw prices in the columns, and then date. Let's get rid of. Let's see, date. Oh, I did it backwards again. I got my eye. Okay, I'll flip it. Wait a second. Let's go ahead and do month. And let's throw it here. And let's throw it there. And let's keep the city and a filter for Athens. Athens only. And now let's look at shop. So take shop, throw it down there. There we go. Now I got shop 1 and 3. Ugh. You see their prices are always all over the place. They're constantly changing every month. And this one's constantly changing every month. So, you can't really use these as controls so easily because they're both changing their prices. This is getting a little bit crazy to think, no, we don't really have a proper control here. Thinking out loud, now this is where if you know the ideal setting, you kind of think about, could you cook it up? Well, one thing you could do, and I'm not going to do it here, but we could find out, no, this isn't going to work either. I was going to say, yeah, they'd have, so if they both changed them in the same direction all the time, but one changed it by a larger magnitude, then we could even still work with, what I'm saying is that if you get my point, is if they're both changing it by increasing, and when they both decrease, but one does it by more than the other, then we could even potentially still have a control group. Okay. But the problem is some are dropping the price while the others are raising it. They're going in opposite directions. It's just, no, that's just not going to work. We don't have a setup here for any kind of experimental setting. It's really hard to think about how to cook up an experimental setting here. Okay, so that's the key point, is that we don't have experimental settings. We don't have, so the rest of the chapter is going to be null. As far as, like, when I look at the rest of the chapter, we cannot apply it. Cannot apply A/B testing here. It's obviously not randomized price testing. It's obviously not, we can't do A/B testing. We can't try to cook up some other type of quasi-experimental setting. That's where we take survey data and try to cook up an experimental setting. We can't really do that so easy here, because we just have a lot of changes with everybody. So anyway, this is going to be the trick and the challenge. They all make changes. We don't have experimental data, so that means we're going to do regressions, which regressions, remember, are correlations. So regressions are going to be correlations, which let's go ahead and duplicate. We'll look at the regression again. So we have some price, and we need quantity, right? Let's see, price. Actually, I want price on the top up there. Let's take date down, and let's look at the average price again. Dimension is average, and we're going to scatter across date. So date, date, like scatter across that time. And we don't want to just look at years. Let's look at, again, month year. Okay, so we can do regressions, these kind of scatter plots, right? These are correlations. And in fact, this will be good enough for what we're going to do. It's something that you can actually use. And again, it kind of comes down to this decision-making process of, how critical is this decision for your business? What are the costs if you're wrong? Regression is going to get you some insight. If you're wrong and there's like a huge cost to you being wrong, maybe you better, hire someone like me to come sharpen up and really, you'll get an economist, get somebody who can cook up and actually do the experimental settings in this book. Okay. We're not going to get there, but doing regression is by itself, miles above, just sort of not doing anything. So, you're definitely equipped to just do this kind of regression analysis here, right, in Tableau. And, in the next sort of homework assignment, you'll figure out how to make managerial decisions based on that information. But so right now, the setup is just to really understand the strengths and limitations of this data set in terms of these questions. And I hope that we've kind of covered an expansive discussion about this. And that's the point to start with. Okay, we'll figure out how to make managerial decisions in this assignment that you've got coming due. Okay, which is to look at and actually calculate elasticities. Okay, so anyway, that's a long-winded video, but I hope that it was just, the key point that you need to take away from this is that every time that you open up a new data set or start a new data assignment, you really do need to consider the data that you have, okay, in terms of variation, in terms of size, and in terms of what kind of statistical designs will be capable and what kinds will not be capable. Those are the very key kind of questions you have here. We have regression. That's what we're capable of. Now, with regression, there's actually other types of topics in regression that I think that so if you're interested in doing this kind of work, I would say my recommendation to you is to look up, we're not going to go there, but multiple regression. Okay. So we have price and quantity. We can also control for other things that are impacting demand. And if you're going to do regression type of analysis, you need to know about how to do multiple regression, because you need to control for other things besides price, outside of price and quantity, that also cause demand to change. Okay, so for example, we can actually add a lot of different factors in here about the macroeconomy, about all types of different things that are going to influence demand, and we can put that into a multiple regression framework and basically control for all those other factors, and then we get a more pure relationship between price and quantity. Okay, because remember, whatever's not in your regression equation, here we just have a simple equation of quantity as a function of price. There's one variable. This is univariate regression. Everything that's not price. So what other things influence demand? A lot of stuff influences demand, right? And all that stuff that influences demand is actually just sitting there in the error term. So that means, to make a more precise regression, we need to pull some of the more variables into that regression equation. So for example, some things we could probably get, like you could probably get the change in GDP growth, that's overall economy. You can probably get that and then bring that information in and utilize it. There may be other types of things like temperature, right? Average temperature for the month may be influencing. You can bring that in, because remember, we have time series, so you can match on the time series in the time dimension and then control for those factors. You can try to bring in other factors of demand and model them. That's outside the scope here. We could go along that route, and I just open the door and tell you that's a route. Hopefully you appreciate it. Anyway, it's a discussion. That's the point. I'm discussing all these things, and these are my thoughts. So I hope you find it helpful. And if you have any other questions or want to continue, please feel free to reach out to me anytime.